So welcome everybody to our Stop the Hustle, How to Deal with Stress and Avoid Burnout. And this is Binny, and Kylie is
Hello.
Next to me, and of course our special guest, Jacqueline.
Hi.
I think most of you that know us well will know that this is a topic very, very close to Kylie and my heart, and I'm sure in Jack's profession you probably get a lot of people that come through your doors that are suffering from burnout or, you know, hustling themselves too hard.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a pretty common thing. I mean, this is a topic very close to our hearts because we have both been through that in various stages of our careers, and in the work that we do with the kinds of people that we work with, it's a common thing. And it actually, I was having breakfast this morning with someone who owns a yoga studio, and she was even sort of saying, you know, that feeling of overwhelm and just feeling like we've got, you know, just because we can do more that we do, and you know, and all of those kinds of things, like still struggling even for the most zen of us.
Yes.
So
and I feel like this is an area that I work with quite a lot, and I'm personally quite interested in it because it's something that I really struggle with, and it's sort of a work in progress. So,
and I think that's so important. I think because, you know, even when you know intellectually all the things that you should be doing to kind of take better care of yourself, actually practicing saying no and putting in boundaries and self-care, and, you know, avoiding the temptations that lead to stress and burnout, or the pressure, succumbing to the pressure of that. Even when you know it, it's still hard.
And I think it's almost the hardest part, because I think I've gathered so many strategies and done so many workshops, and I speak about it every day with clients, but actually doing it is hard. I think I'm really good at collecting ideas.
Well, you need your own psychologist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But even she can't cure me.
And I think the one thing that I learned the very hard way is that I had no idea my body was so good at communicating with me, but I was really bad at listening. And it can tell you all the time when you're getting close to burnout, but you don't realise unless you're tuning in. And I've become so much better at knowing what my signs are. And I think when you do tune in and realise, oh, wow, so those 2 years leading up to my burnout was actually my body telling me to slow down. I just thought it was getting old or not exercising or whatever it might be, that they're really, really important things to listen to.
So let's get into that, because I know that you've got some great strategies and slides and suggestions that you're going to share with us today. But I remember coming to the end of a really full-on year and coming across this quote that's been attributed to 3 different people who said it, so I just haven't put anyone's name in it, but it's not the load that breaks you, it's how you carry it. And that really stuck with me at a time when I felt like I was carrying an enormous load, and you know, learning how to actually put some of it down, and how to strengthen in other areas to keep carrying what I knew I had to carry was really important. So this quote to me is actually really pivotal in coming to this and saying it's not just about dropping everything or walking away from everything, or, you know, just about potentially working less. It's about actually how do you deal with what you've got on your plate and get really clear about why it's there. And for a long time, well, you know, I'm on Instagram a lot, and I see the word hustle, like get up and hustle, and you know, and buying posters to put up on your wall that say hustle. I grew up in a time when the word hustle actually meant something quite corrupt. So, you know, it was to you know, hustle somebody into doing something that they either didn't want to do, or it was, you know, it was kind of an illegal or a high pressure tactic, or
the words pressure and coerce
and aggressive, and you know, all of those kind of things were all about or fraud, you know, like it sort of was coupled. I don't know, was there a movie? Was there like The Hustler or something? It was like a, you know, there was a movie with someone in it. It was called The Hustler. So while, you know, the idea of kind of hustling sounds, you know, exciting and full of energy and moving, for me, I always saw hustle as something that was to be avoided because it didn't sound like you were actually doing the right thing by anybody. So
especially yourself, I think.
Yeah. So, and it's so easy to get caught up with this idea of we have to hustle. And if you do a search on Pinterest, which we'll do in a minute, it's just, you know, it's rife in our culture. And this was another quote that I came across recently by Liz Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and recently Big Magic. And, you know, this idea of grace, when I was sort of thinking about a word to replace hustle, what would I prefer? And grace just to me takes me to places where I feel more inspired and calm and still moving, but doing it more mindfully and consciously and you know, and with my own style rather than feeling like I'm being hustled into someone else's idea of what work should look like or feel like, which is what you get when you go to Pinterest. You know, which is the hustle hard girl, and, you know, when you rest, you rust, and you know, it's all about this. You know, hustling. You have to hustle to get your dreams to come alive, and you know, and seeing all of that stuff just is really, for somebody who wants to do a lot of interesting things in the world anyway. I don't need to be constantly kind of bombarded with these work harder, you know, kind of ideas.
Well, especially when I know I've been there, done that, and it doesn't serve you.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve your mind or your body.
So, Jack,
stress versus burnout.
Let's jump in with what is the difference between stress and burnout? Because this was a really interesting thing for me to discover when I went through my stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction to make. Stress is actually something that is healthy for us as humans, but it needs to be a certain type of stress. So severe, ongoing, really intense stress is not the kind of stress that's healthy or adaptive. It doesn't serve a purpose, but stress motivates us to do stuff. It motivates us to do things like go to the GP to get our skin checked, or, you know, study for some kind of exam that we're sitting, or prepare for a webinar. If we didn't feel stressed, we wouldn't do any of those things. So I think it's really important not to demonize stress, but to sort of see the value in it, and then to see the shift between the continuum between stress and burnout, and being really aware of what it looks like when stress is moving into burnout for you. And I kind of like to think of it almost like a barometer. It's not black and white. You're not in stress or in burnout. You're usually kind of moving from stress into burnout, and you'll have signs that come up along the way, and they'll be different for everyone. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But I guess once you're moving towards the burnout end of the continuum, stress is, once stress is ongoing or it's quite severe, you might find that you end up moving towards the burnout end of the continuum. So stress is a risk factor for burnout, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead to burnout. And that's what we'll talk about today, a little bit about what to do if you do notice yourself shifting in that direction, because it's something that you can kind of, there are forks in the road, and you can potentially divert away
and
from
it really all comes back to awareness.
Yeah, definitely.
And
which is really tricky. It's hard to be aware, I think, and you can't do anything unless you know what's happening.
Yeah, and also I think the first time that you've ever experienced those feelings, it's hard to be aware, because you don't know where allowing them to continue will take you.
Yes.
And I think that's the hardest thing. So, you know, hopefully by sharing this for those that have never had ongoing stress or never got to the point of burnout, will help them avoid actually getting there.
Definitely. Yeah, so I think that's sort of really important, is understanding that there is a big difference between stress and burnout. And stress can just be sort of somewhat transitory or, you know, in a moment, but it doesn't necessarily take you down in the process, where burnout is a takedown.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
It grabs you, throws you to the ground, sits on you for a while.
Makes you kind of I guess it brings up lessons, I think, whereas stress, you don't necessarily need to pause in the same way. With burnout, I think it kind of grabs our attention in a different kind of way.
There's a really good TED talk with a lady that talks about stress and actually harnessing stress for, you know, for the upside that it actually does bring. Like you said, you know, it does motivate us to do things and to get, you know, to actually make certain things happen. But, you know, it's when you're in that constant state and when you can only be driven by that it becomes a real problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we stop stress morphing into burnout?
Big question. So as Binny was just saying, I think self-awareness is it's crucial, and I think without it you can't really do the rest of the things that we're suggesting, because you can't really change something that you aren't really aware is broken or needs fixing. Or so I think one of the most important things that I've found in managing my own stress and trying to prevent it from turning into burnout, but also in working with clients, is becoming aware of your warning signs that you're moving into the burnout zone. And I think it's really important to be quite literal when you're figuring out your warning signs. So not sort of like, I guess, really broad statements like start doing too many things for other people. Look, that's a really good starting point, but flesh that out. Like, who do you do too much for? Is it your family? Is it work? What sorts of things do you start saying yes to that you don't normally when you're not kind of in that burnout zone? Being really clear on the specifics. As a psychologist, and if anyone's seen a psychologist before, you will probably laugh at this, but we like to break things down into thoughts, feelings, behaviours, and the body. So really thinking about those 4 areas when you're trying to figure out what it is that might be a warning sign for you. And we're going to come back to that, to breaking those things down a little bit. But I think we've kind of touched on this, but I think it's really important to try as much as possible to become aware of the burnout as it's unfolding before it reaches that rock bottom point. I think it's still, you know, obviously sometimes we need to reach rock bottom to pay attention to what's happening. But if you can catch it earlier, it's sometimes easier to get back on the horse, or you might decide to get back on a different horse. But it can, if you let burnout kind of go right to the end point, it can actually be a really difficult and kind of exhausting process getting back on track.
Well, it's like an extreme, isn't it? Like you go extreme rock bottom, it's harder to bounce back up.
Yes.
And for some people, they never actually completely recover and get back up to where they were performing, or takes a lot longer to get them up as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I found challenging, and probably what led to me ending up at rock bottom and burnout, is that I was aware of all the things. And when you're saying about the whole body was probably the first thing. It was when my thoughts, I just kept thinking, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. But my excuse was, well, I have to, because my work is expecting me to. Or if you work for yourself, it's my clients are expecting me to. So you're always convincing yourself that you need to continue because other people are expecting that of you. But in the end, if you end up in burnout, you're actually letting them down more.
By drop the whole bundle.
Dropping the whole bundle than actually taking that little bit of extra time to leave work early or go out and have lunch and do those things that might actually slow that whole process down. It's really easy to put the blame on other people is the reason why you can't actually stop the pattern that you're in.
And I find that often when people are in that zone, we sort of talk about, well, how can you communicate that to the people around you? And it's so common for people to come back and say, oh, actually my boss was fine with me taking some time out. They actually said that they, supported that and encouraged it. And that's not always the case, but it's more often than not, it's ourselves that we're sort of, as you said, we're sort of saying other people won't let me, but really it's someone inside us that's saying you're not supposed to stop. Whether that's a parent, like some kind of echo from your upbringing, or just something that's self-imposed.
Yeah.
Like in this point that you've got here, we would never make a friend wait until they were desperate before you gave them love, support and care.
Yeah.
It's that whole thing that came out of our last webinar, which is treating yourself as your own best friend.
Yeah.
When you see yourself in that situation. So I really loved what you said about the 4 different things. So it's our thoughts, behaviours, what's going on in our body, and our actions.
And our emotions, behaviours and actions kind of together. And even urges. So sometimes you might not be doing something, but you might have an urge to do it. So for me, shopping is a big one. And usually it's an action rather than an urge. I usually follow through. But it's in all seriousness, it's me kind of numbing out and kind of gathering things to make myself feel better. So you can do that with food, alcohol, drugs, scrolling the internet, Netflix.
Just that kind of numbing out. Or really wanting to be sort of feeling like numbed out. Definitely. Which aren't actually proactively helping you get out of burnout. It's actually keeping you there. There's nothing actually comforting or healing about any of those things necessarily.
No, it's almost like ignoring yourself. Like we're saying with this last point, it's kind of your friend is saying they need help and you're saying, well, hang on, I just need to kind of eat a little bit before I help you, or go shopping a little bit. And I think sometimes you just have to do that though. So I think you have to be compassionate with yourself when you do find that you have those behaviours coming up, because it's really normal to want to find ways to soothe ourselves, but sometimes, as you said, those ways don't necessarily serve us so well. I was actually thinking about this the other day when it was just before I went away, and I was kind of trying to get a lot of things done, and I was so busy that I wasn't even giving myself time to pee. So I was sitting at my desk, doing the rocking backwards and forwards and typing, and I was thinking, I would never make a friend wait to go to the toilet. But I'm making myself wait because I'm in this stressed kind of I was almost in the burnout zone. And it sounds silly, but that was something really little. It's so significant. Not allowing yourself to have a basic need met.
So keep an eye on what our thoughts what thoughts are popping up, what emotions we're feeling around what's going on in our lives, what behaviours or actions we're engaging with. And you mentioned your body.
So I think, as you were saying, Binny, I really feel like the body is something that is ignored a lot when it comes to stress and burnout, and we often only pay attention when it's screaming out to us.
And mine was, I mean, I couldn't move my neck more than 10%, but I just thought that was normal. I had a heel spur.
That's totally normal.
Totally normal. And I was, limping around in agony. I'd done 2 discs in my back and was standing up at work and couldn't bend over, anywhere for 6 months. I mean, I don't think my body could have screamed any harder. My hands were peeling. I mean, it went to every sort of aspect of my body to try and say, you can't do this anymore. And I still kept going.
And I heard you say before that you felt that you couldn't let other people down. So self-sacrificing is often linked with people having sort of ignoring their body and only paying attention to it once it's screaming out, so that then they can actually say, well, I have to stop because I've got a migraine, or I have to stop because my hands are peeling, rather than I have to stop because...
Sit down.
So I think being able to tune into that before it explodes and noticing the really subtle nuances. So being able to sort of look at, okay, when I'm in, say, that middle zone where I'm kind of on the precipice of potentially moving into burnout, what does it look like, versus maybe being closer to actually being in the burnout zone. So even... I ask clients to look for things like noticing changes in their breathing, their posture, whether they're fidgeting more, whether they become agitated or kind of really lethargic.
And they probably couldn't tell you the answers to that until they take the time out to stop and actually pay that attention to themselves. Because it's, that they're not focusing on them right now. They're focusing on everything else.
And I think their mind as well. So people tend to overvalue their mind during stress and burnout, and really listen to what it has to say and ignore their body. But your body is actually, it's incredibly wise, and often when you ask yourself what you need, your body will know before your mind knows. If you practice that enough, I think it starts to
I totally believe that.
Yeah. So you get a sense of when you're in burnout, when you're, when your body is starting to fail on you in some way, shape, or form, and that's probably quite, you're well and truly in it then, probably by that stage, because you've kind of ignored potentially some other external things that might be going on, like maybe your interactions with other people, or maybe even just how you're feeling about being engaged in the work that you're doing. You're either not feeling engaged, or you're feeling resentful or short-tempered or uninspired or tired, just really, really tired. Yeah.
I think it's actually useful to think about what burnout looks like before you get there. So if you're someone who has experienced burnout in the past, or you feel like you might be in a situation where you might experience it in the future, decide for yourself what burnout looks like, so that you can say to yourself, okay, well, this is what I said I would, if I was moving towards this, I would start to look after myself. So don't sort of try and decide in the moment. I think it's really tricky to for me anyway, I find it hard to take responsibility for myself when I'm in that zone. I have to wait until someone else is kind of going, you're actually, I think you're about to melt down. So it's sort of taking responsibility for looking after yourself, I think, kind of being really big, grown up about it.
Yeah. And that's so crucial to, coming back to the conversation that we just had before about, I need to take responsibility for myself so that I can show up the best I can possibly be for everyone else in my life. So I come first in this, because if I'm not in a good place, then I can't be in a good place for everyone else. So, and that's not self-sacrificing. That's saying, that's essential for me to be able to live well.
Well, it's that phrase from Essentialism, the protect the asset, that Greg McKeown has stated, that you are an asset to your business. Like you would invest in computers and upgrading all your software for computers and everything else that you have in your business. You're the most important asset. So you need just as much time and effort and thought around you and protecting you for your business and your family and your children and everything.
Definitely.
So the other one for me is crying a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big crier.
Teary, watching the news and you're suddenly bawling.
Can't watch the news.
Actually
can't watch the news.
It's good to stay away from things that trigger you too
I get
much.
the headlines, and that's kind of about as, and the front page of the newspaper when I go in and get my chai in the morning, and that's about as much as I can take.
Well, I think that it's important to protect yourself when you're in this zone, to be able to kind of back off on some things and be mindful of what you're putting into your mind. So watching the news might actually be kind of a silly thing to do. For me, I can't go to Nova Cinema because that's where I watch all my kind of sad, melancholic films, and I genuinely have to stay away from there if I'm in this zone, because it's almost like it feeds it. And sometimes I wonder if I want to feed it, that feeling of wanting to.
Well, places have emotions, right? So what you felt in there. So, that's why you go away to a health retreat. You actually put yourself in a different physical environment to break whatever is triggering you, or to distance yourself between, that whatever's contributing to it. So, so that makes total sense. So this is kind of what we were talking about, wasn't it? Some of those red flags.
So I ask clients to, when we're working together, when looking at their thinking, to try and pick up on themes in your thinking. So looking at things like personalizing, catastrophizing, overestimating,
underestimating.
Overestimating, and usually overestimating something bad happening and underestimating your ability to cope with that bad thing happening. It's kind of a combo. Sort of thoughts around uncertainty, being able to not cope with uncertainty. I think that can be a big one for people. Uncertainty is hard, I think, even when you're feeling like you're in a fairly kind of good zone, but when you're in the burnout zone, uncertainty can feel really difficult to manage, and unfortunately it's a big part of life. So that can really trigger people. Becoming really judgmental of yourself, but also of other people. I think we're often
judgy pants.
Yeah.
So my friend on social media said, I had my judgy pants on the other day.
Yeah. You do. I think, and it's not just judging yourself. I think it's judging other people.
Yeah.
For me anyway, I think we're really happy to acknowledge we judge ourselves, but usually the way we judge ourselves is quite highly correlated with the way we judge other people. We're just a little bit more private about it.
Yeah.
So picking up on that, if that's increasing.
So they say, you know, one of the things that Brené Brown says is that you can't give to others what you don't have for yourself.
Yeah.
So if you don't have kindness and compassion for yourself, it's very hard for you to be able to give it to someone else.
And I think you can, some people, well, I find you can give it, but it's not very authentic. It's sort of, if you can't give it to yourself, then why do other people deserve it? It sort of feels a bit hypocritical almost.
Yeah. You don't let anyone else off the hook, because I'm not letting myself off the hook. Why would I let anybody else?
Yeah. Shifts in behaviour we've sort of talked about, but I think that some of the things that I notice for myself and others is particularly feeling unmotivated, feeling like you just don't care anymore. So you might have really cared about this
don't
thing.
care. That's a good, I know that one. Yeah.
It's a really awful feeling, I think, being disconnected and almost just like, whatever, who cares? It doesn't matter anymore. And especially if it was something that mattered to you before, I think it's quite a loss. And one of the risks of letting burnout go to that rock bottom point, I think, is that feeling of not caring. Feeling disconnected from other people and kind of isolating yourself or withdrawing. I think that's a big one as well. We've also talked about self-sacrifice. I think that is a common pattern for people when they're moving in this direction.
But do you also think that it's a reason why you also get there in the first place?
Definitely.
So I've had a few conversations with my psychologist about self-sacrifice, which is quite interesting. And and in my situation, I think it's, and I think potentially for a lot of women in being raised in caring and nurturing roles, that, you know, it's all about giving and but knowing when what our boundaries are. And I know that we're going to talk about boundaries, about how to do that, you know, how to actually be able to say what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah. And again, thinking about that ahead of time. I know it sounds a bit maybe anal to plan ahead for all of these things, but when you're in the burnout zone, you can't actually make complex decisions. You can't work through sort of multifaceted problems, because the part of your brain that is responsible for that, the front part of your brain, is usually offline because the fight-flight response has kicked in. So you've got stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline running through your veins, and it really isn't, you can't think clearly in those situations. You're just in survival mode. So being able to think through how you would cope with sometimes really kind of complex situations, thinking about it ahead of time. So for me, thinking about what my boundaries are, it's actually quite a complex thing to think about.
But you think about like ambulance drivers and, you know, paramedics that come to the scene of, you know, they have trained to, you know, their drills and their rehearsals and their checklists and, you know, and looking out for each other, so that when they get in that stage, you know, they've already practiced how to deal with all that adrenaline running through them, you know, and you think about pilots and all, you know, all of these kind of professions where, you know, there is danger and there is stress. But you can get better at dealing with it. You know, you can actually, if you practice, if you're aware of it, if you call it out, if you have people around you that can also, you know, see it for what it is and be there with you. So
yeah, that's a really good analogy actually, because I don't think that they could do what they did if they hadn't sort of thought that out and had protocols around it. So
yeah, so why are we any different? Why are we
need protocols?
We need protocols for our fight. And the other thing that I heard recently was about the fight, flight or freeze.
Yeah.
So it's not like we don't necessarily flee a situation or we don't necessarily fight it, but sometimes we can just be frozen in it. And we actually don't know how to get out of it. We can't even rally to fight or flight. We're just kind of frozen.
Yeah, I think that's where the feelings of detachment and feeling unmotivated come in, and also just feeling hopeless. It's almost like, this is where I'm going to set up camp here and stay here forever in this burnout zone.
Yeah. I once had an employee who was like that, and she just got very disconnected and very kind of withdrawn, and you know, and I actually sort of said to her, I don't know if this is the right thing for HR, and I said, you know, when I've been in places like that before, I've actually left. I haven't kept myself in this place. You know, I've done something about it. I've left a situation that hasn't felt good. But she was just like defeated in that one spot and couldn't pick herself up to, you know, get out of it.
And I think the example you were talking about before with the emergency services, that you can train yourself to deal with that situation. I think where I found myself when I was in burnout zone or had hit burnout was the realisation that I actually don't want to train myself to deal with that. That I don't want to be in that kind of scenario and changing myself or my behaviour or my coping mechanisms to cope with that. So it was that realisation that I do have to flight from this. But then I think I froze. Because it's like, well, I don't actually know where you go from here. But and accepting that that's okay. That you don't, if the situation that's presented to you forces you to have to behave or change or be in a certain way to cope with that, that perhaps it's the situation that you need to remove yourself from.
Definitely.
And then that's where I found myself.
I think the learnings though come from the fact that you are likely to bump into that situation again somewhere else in your life.
Yes.
In some other shape or form. So the lessons out of that, you can't necessarily avoid those situations, but you can definitely choose how you're going to handle them next time.
And I just knew that I didn't want to have it in a corporate environment. Because it's, you know, very different. But in my own business, I can manage that. And so Danny, one of the people listening in on the webinar, has also pointed out that, you know, you can also get stuck if you just don't know what to do. If you actually don't know how to get yourself up and out of it, you know, you don't know how to fight or flight. you just and I think that's probably at the very far end of the burnout zone too, do you think?
Well, yeah, I do. But then I also think for me, sometimes when I've had mini burnouts, what stopped them from becoming a full-blown burnout has actually been doing nothing, stepping back and
well, there's doing nothing and doing nothing. I mean, stepping back is still doing something,
you're right,
isn't it?
Actually, so stepping back and resting is probably what I mean. I think that, and just having a day, or, you know, not everyone has a day up their sleeve. That was when I was a student, so I had weeks up my sleeve. But
no, come on, let's be serious. Everybody could have a day if they really wanted to.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, if in the end it's probably going to save you, you know, a lot of time to step back and really pause and reflect. And I think we'll talk about that towards the end of the webinar in terms of the lessons and paying attention to those.
Yeah. Well, let's move on.
Now, what else?
So what's your plan for curbing the hustle? So when you're in the middle of a meltdown, you can't be expected to think clearly, which we were just talking about. And we're talking about that fight, flight response hijacks. And we're not, you know, it's actually very hard for us to make good decisions. How do we actually get out of it?
Well, I think it will probably jump to the next slide, because that's
great.
Planning, I think is key. And then in terms of what your plan contains, I think starting with the basics is really important. So thinking about what you need right now in terms of those sort of things that you need to survive. So things like food, have you slept enough? Have you exercised? Have you rested? Do you need a bath? Do you need to cry? Do you need to have a hug? Really kind of basic
all of those
needs.
things all at once.
Yes, exactly. I've popped this Maslow's hierarchy of needs in here because I actually find this a really useful reference when trying to sit with people and figure out what their plan looks like. So everyone's plan looks different, but this is a really good, guide, because basically what Maslow said was, and he was a psychoanalyst, and his theory was it was about human needs and what motivates humans. And he argued that unless the bottom rung of the ladder is met, then you can't kind of keep moving up the ladder. So when we're talking about running businesses and, you know, all of the rest of our lives, looking after families and things like that, we can't expect to do those higher level things, like make decisions about, you know, what we're going to do next with our business, what we're going to do in terms of staff, any kind of future plans, all of that kind of exciting stuff can't happen unless we've met those basic needs first. And I don't know about you guys, but I find that that bottom rung of the ladder is actually where I start to notice holes appearing when I'm moving into the burnout zone. I eat less, or I eat kind of poorly. And I don't think I'm not sort of arguing that you get really vigilant and think, well, you know, if I haven't eaten breakfast, then that means something's going wrong. We're looking for patterns, sort of overarching patterns. But yeah, I find that I tend to sort of sleep less. I tend not to go to yoga. I tend to talk less to family and friends, all of those really basic things, but they're actually really important. They're building blocks for bigger self-care.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that one that you just said about talking to friends and family, like when you're in overwhelm, the energy to just have a conversation with somebody just becomes too much. Or it feels like it's too much. And yet it's the thing that can potentially connect you with something that can help you, give you a lifeline to get out. But mine is definitely sleep and rest and talking. You know, I remember when I was 18 months postnatal with my first baby, who just wasn't sleeping through the night, and I had gone back to work, and like I could not hold a conversation with my husband for a sustained period of time. I was just so tight, and he had to sit down and actually call it out for what it was, because I was just, you know, it was all going on in my head, but nothing was actually coming out, and so it couldn't. You know, and it was kind of all just circling and washing around inside. So
and that can feel really lonely and empty. I think sometimes when we're in this space, we do feel, we feel isolated and like we're different to everyone else. But it's actually really hard to talk. Or the
stigma of I'm not coping. You know, when everyone else seems to be coping and I'm not. You know, I think being able to surrender and actually say that comes, and that was probably the first time in my life that I'd ever really bumped up against that. So, you know,
do you think having someone else sort of, I wonder if that's a really important point as well, having people around you that know what your burnout signs are maybe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody who can, you know, like what you were saying, you know, somebody that can actually see it for what it is and just say, this isn't you. You know, like, where have you gone? I
think that's why AOK Day is great. You know, I mean, we shouldn't need an excuse on one day to say it. It should be something that is used a lot more often, just to check in.
That's how most of our Mondays start, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
She walks in, she looks at me, she goes, are you okay? So I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I know that people can, you know, print that out. They can find it online. It's really helpful. So one of the questions that we had was also, what about if you're a fighter and you just keep fighting? Can you fight your way out of burnout?
That's a really good question, and I if we can, we might come to that in the next couple of slides, because I think
you should see the excitement on your eyes.
I'm like, oh, we're on the same page. So in terms of other things that you might need, I guess this slide is for many people, it's a work in progress. So you might have to experience burnout or a mini burnout or severe stress to actually to ask yourself this question. And there are lots of extra things that you can add in beyond meeting your basic needs. So I think mindfulness is pivotal. It's an evidence-based approach for managing stress and burnout, but it's also, mindfulness is, the beauty of mindfulness is you don't have to be using it to prevent stress and burnout. It can actually just be a really important tool for having a kind of fairly grounded and even keel lifestyle. and for managing those times when life isn't like that. It's not just for calm and zen. I think, sorry.
So I was just going to say, so when you say mindfulness, because it is a word that's bandied around a lot, how do you define that?
Oh, it's tricky because there are so many definitions out there. But for me, mindfulness is being aware of what's happening in the present moment. And by that, I mean internally and externally. And you can choose to focus your attention on something in particular, or you can choose to kind of be aware of everything simultaneously. But when I say internal experience, mindfulness is being aware of what's going on with your thinking, what's going on with your body, what's going on in terms of how you're feeling emotionally, and also being aware of any urges to do things or to not do things. So mindfulness is a tool for being able to, I guess, notice things as they're unfolding, so you can become conscious of the things that you do and don't do that make life harder or easier.
Yep. Yeah. And how do you tap into it? Because I imagine just the very act of coming and talking to you as a psychologist is an act of mindfulness.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, I mean, there are lots of different ways that you can practice mindfulness. Self-awareness is a form of mindfulness. I encourage people to find a way to do mindfulness that works for them. So for some people it would be really formal, and they'll start off doing formal meditations, looking at, say, mindfulness of thoughts or mindfulness of their body. For other people, it will be more portable types of mindfulness. For me, I don't really like sitting down and doing the sort of really long meditations. I tend to like to do shorter, more sort of informal meditations. So mindfulness of walking. I'll often do mindfulness when I'm washing the dishes. Kind of bringing mindfulness to everyday life.
I find it's when I'm swimming.
Oh, yeah, okay. Great.
It's for some reason my mind doesn't race, and it's like I'm meditating, and I can just, if you put me running, all I think is I can't do this. My feet are sore, my calves are sore, the whole thing. But for me, swimming is just, it's great.
Yeah, okay. Sounds peaceful.
It is. No kids, that's why.
I think it's really important to have a strategy to calm your body, because calming your body calms your mind. And I think people have different ways of doing that. You might do something formal like mindfulness or relaxation. You might do a breathing exercise. It might be yoga. It might be going for a walk with a friend. I tend not to prescribe kind of specific strategies because you really need to figure out what works for you.
A hot shower.
Yeah, definitely.
I get so much clarity by having a shower, especially at night time, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like as a way to kind of calm whatever's going on in my mind, and because you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. You're just there. And it's, that there's something about being in water.
Nurturing.
Yeah.
I think thinking about self-soothing and nurturing strategies is really important. So being able to do what you would do for a friend. You would suggest that they, had a cup of tea and a hot bath or a hot shower, and you would make them something to eat and those sorts of things, which I guess comes back to that previous slide of basics, but sometimes that maybe is a little bit beyond basic. It can feel actually really hard to do.
Yep.
What else? So techniques for dealing with the self-talk that happens when we're in this zone. That one's a little bit tricky to elaborate on in this short space of time, but there are lots of different ways that you can deal with sort of troubling thoughts or thoughts that tend to come up over and over as sort of themes in your thoughts. And in psychology, there's two schools of thought. Cognitive behavior therapy argues that you need to challenge those thoughts and try and understand that, they're not facts, they're not the truth, and it argues that there is actually another way of looking at things. Mindfulness is a little less, focused on shifting the thoughts and more on changing your relationship with the thoughts. So rather than arguing with the thoughts and saying, well, maybe that thought's not true, mindfulness takes more of a passive stance, but I think it's actually really effective. And helps you to separate from your thoughts and to not necessarily buy into them, to allow them to be there.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe, I'm not sure whether a lot of the people listening in have busy minds, but I think we've kind of talked about having busy minds, and to expect your mind to kind of slow down is actually not a realistic expectation, but being able to be comfortable with the chatter.
Yeah.
So if you had some self-talk that said, I can't stop doing this because it's what everyone expects, or you know, that I'm fine, you know, and you're obviously not, and you know, you're either not wanting to acknowledge it. Like, so what would be some of the strategies to deal with that? You know, I can't stop this, or I can't not do this, or the you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, actually, because sometimes what happens with mindfulness, so there's a bit of a myth in mindfulness that you should just sort of treat each thought as a cloud in the sky and allow it to kind of move on. But some thoughts do need to be examined and to be looked at. So mindfulness doesn't argue that you should just kind of let every thought go, but it does argue, it's the idea of mindfulness is to allow yourself to think about those thoughts, but not to ruminate on them, not to kind of get really bogged down by them, but to put time aside to reflect on, okay, this thought keeps coming up. I keep having this thought that I need to keep doing this. What's that about? So mindfully stepping back and giving yourself the space to explore that is important as well.
That's why coaches and psychologists are so important, because they can ask you a question that challenges that.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, one of the questions I ask is that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, is that actually true? And when people are challenged with that, and they, you know, they start going, well, actually, no, you know, and they start finding reasons to either to justify it, or once they've gone down the justification path and they realize just how ridiculous some of the stuff is that they're saying, you know, they start kind of coming to their own conclusions about that. So that's one of the questions that I have, you know, with some of that self-talk is like, is that true? And the other one that I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like, well, what do I need? What do I need right now?
Yeah.
You know, what can I let go of, or whose help can I ask, or what can I defer, or you know, so it's, if I get to that stage, it's like, well, what would I need to be able to cope?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like flipping that question. If you've got that self-talk, it's, I think, you know, being aware of it so that you can then actually challenge it.
Yeah.
You challenge it. Yeah.
And not necessarily putting pressure on yourself to answer those questions at the time. Sometimes you do need to step back, recuperate, take some time off, pause in whatever way you can, and then answer those questions.
Cry a lot. Actually remove the emotion. Because I think then things can be seen more clearly when the emotion's removed, and the crying kind of releases that.
And then you can think from a space that has clarity rather than feels sort of foggy and really kind of difficult to know, do I feel this or do I feel that? And you know, that space that you sometimes get in where you can chat with one friend and they suggest something and it feels like, there's the answer, and then you chat with someone else and they say the total opposite and you think, there's the answer. Sometimes you really just need to give yourself time to unpack, especially those big burnouts where there might be more than one message contained in the burnout.
Yeah. Well, do we get onto that, don't we?
Yes.
So what happens if you are what happens if in theory you know how to take care of yourself when you're heading into burnout, but you just can't seem to do it?
Yeah. So I think this is a really important point and comes back to the question that Kylie asked. What if you sort of end up, you know, all of these strategies, you know, all of these techniques, tools, you might be like me and have made a career out of it, and you still find it really difficult to do what you know will work. And I think that's where potentially kind of deeper self-exploration can help, and potentially seeing a therapist or a counsellor or a psychologist can help too, because sometimes it's tricky to shine a light on those deeper issues when they're your own issues. Our unconscious mind is usually operating there. So, I think asking yourself what gets in the way is really important. So are you prone to self-sacrificing, which we've talked about and touched on? Do you feel undeserving of rest?
Oh, rest is for the week, Jack.
Yeah.
That
should be an Instagram
I
time.
don't have time to rest.
What do you mean?
I know, it's for the week.
Oh my God, the years of self-sacrificing, rest is for the week kind of crap that I went through. You know, and it's kind of like that. It's the stress gone mad kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like it's not knowing where the boundary is and going, actually, you don't need to do that. Actually, you can just let that go. And that's the perfectionism bit that gets caught up in all of that. And, you know, I can do that. Like, I've got a few hours. I can just keep doing that little extra bit rather than saying, that's enough. You know, you need to go to sleep now.
And denying ourselves something simple like sleep, saying I don't need that, or I don't need breakfast, or I don't.
And I've allowed a special friend to ask me a question in my head when I'm trying to take on too much that will say, well, if you don't do this today or this hour or this week, then what's the worst thing that can happen? And instantly he just said, it doesn't need to be done. It doesn't have to. No one's going to impact it. It's a self-imposed deadline of the things I would like to get done because it might make me feel good to achieve all of that. But it doesn't have to happen.
But again, owning that, isn't it? It's about recognising that that's coming mostly from within. It might have started from a different place, you know, from something that happened during childhood or your teen years or whatever. But it's you now that kind of carries that with you. Yeah,
and I think more working for myself now, it's become more obvious that I am my own boss and I set the deadlines and I decide, you know, when things are done. So I can actually choose. So I've had to unlearn a lot of behaviour from corporate. That other people are expecting things to be done in a certain time.
You can still burn yourself out in your own business.
Oh,
though.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt.
Totally.
I mean, that's why we've written the course that we've written because we know that that's still the reality in your own business.
Yeah, and so that, the awareness piece of going, I didn't sign up to kind of build this life of freedom and flexibility to end up where I was ending up, you know, working for somebody else.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's really important. If you are working for other people and there is this expectation, like these unrealistic expectations about what can be achieved in the amount of time, I think that was my biggest thing. Like if I was to go back, I would have a much firmer sense of being able to say no or to negotiate, you know, and one of the things that I kind of got to was, you know, and I know that you did this, Ben, when you had, you know, were in burnout and you went back and you were going, you know, this needs to change.
Well, I was terrified. Terrified of going back.
And you'd mind mapped everything that you were doing.
The biggest mind map I've ever done in my life. It was an A3 piece of paper and every part of the paper was full of every aspect of my job and all the projects and expectations and everything. And I just put massive circles around about 3/4 of it and said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is actually not part of my job. You go and find someone else. And they split my role in half happily because they visually saw it. It wasn't just in my head, me thinking they could see what I do. No one knows what anyone else does because no one cares about what anyone else does. In reality, they only care about themselves. So to visualise that and go, and, you know, you can even do it with your own family to say, okay, this is what happens to run this household. I'm
not doing this, this and this.
And this is where I need your help because
and this is what we do.
Can see it and you can package it up and hand it to someone sort of physically.
And this is what we do in the course. That's where we actually start, is actually doing a dump of everything that's in your brain and putting it down on paper. So when I was in corporate, I did a very similar thing. Like I would have, well, these are all the projects that I'm working on. You're now wanting me to do this. I'm at capacity. Which one do you now want me to drop in order to bring on this new one, or how to reprioritize? You know, those are the tools that you kind of start to get a bit savvy with, rather than just thinking, I'm an open vessel that everybody can just drop everything in, you know, and I will just keep expanding.
I'm a yes man and I'll keep saying yes. Yes woman.
But, you know, people, I think when you're able to have tools like that, you know, actually getting it down on paper, it takes the emotion out of it because it's on black and white for everybody to see. It's a case that stands on its own, that it's not just full of me being emotional. It's like, well, here it is, you know, in black and white. This is what it looks like. It's so helpful. Writing it down and getting it down on paper really helps to literally see it for what it is.
I remember doing that in the course that you guys ran.
The time,
the time course,
I'm thinking, wow, there's just a lot of stuff on this page.
And then you kind of have a little bit of compassion for yourself.
Yeah,
to go, well, no wonder I'm
doing a lot.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, well, who else can you get to help with it, or what's actually essential, or, you know, what can you put on a back burner, you know, not to say to drop it completely, although that might be it too, but like to just say, you know, what can we work on now? So,
and is the non-delegation potentially procrastination as well? So for me, not delegating tasks to my client support team, it was me just procrastinating but not taking responsibility for that. So going, I don't have enough time, and so again that theme of responsibility. So I think other things, like sometimes when we slow down, we feel empty and we feel alone, and so the burnout can actually be a way of avoiding those feelings. But in the end, sometimes the burnout is harder than actually facing those feelings, but they're quite they're uncomfortable feelings to potentially face up to and try and work through.
So we can get into burnout because we're on the run from other hard feelings.
On the run from maybe a relationship we need to leave, or a job that doesn't actually suit us, that doesn't make us feel good about what we do.
But it ticks all the boxes to everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I
think that's a really tricky one. And the leap story this week kind of really spoke about that. Really having to
a lawyer to going back to musical theatre, studying musical theatre at 28, learning how to tap dance at 28 full time. Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think this last point is different for everyone, and it might be different if you've experienced multiple burnouts. There might be different messages within each of them, but asking yourself what the burnout is trying to tell you. So if the burnout could actually speak, what would it say? And it probably might say lots of different things. And there's some questions there, but they're just sort of, I guess, starting points to look at those things yourself. And you don't necessarily have to wait until you're in burnout zone to ask yourself these questions. You don't have to wait until you've had a full meltdown. You can ask yourself when you're moving towards this, what is it that you need to listen to and to trust within yourself.
A burnout is almost the forcing you to actually look at this.
It is. I think you're right.
And the big one for me was, after a couple of sessions with a psychologist and a lot of crying, was the question of, when was the last time you actually said no to somebody? And for me, I was actually deadly silent because I had no answer. I couldn't remember. So coming out of that burnout made me way more aware of the fact that if anybody ever approaches me or asks me to do anything, I would always just take it on. No question. I'll just, sure. Pile on the back.
And there's some strategies for that as well. Because I've where that expectation is that you can take stuff on, and again, it's getting older and wiser. And, I actually have, as was my electronic diary, but I also have a physical diary. And, part of that is sort of saying, I need to check my diary first before I can get back to you. Or when I have emails, I'm like, I'm not going to sit down and respond to any of these emails until I actually have my diary in front of me and I can actually see what my commitments are. So it's not, or saying, that sounds like a great idea, let me think about it and come back to you. Or, you know, we talked about how to say no, oh, that's a great idea, just not right now, or, those kind of things.
And it is something I practice every day, and I have to, because that's my nature. So I'm, in order to preserve myself and my energy and to allow time for rest, and practicing saying no is something that I'm very aware of.
And setting expectations, sort of realistic expectations, and not being afraid to say, actually I can do that, but not until October, and it's going to take me 3 weeks.
And being, I think being mindful that will potentially bring up guilt, and that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing for you to have done. And I think with more and more practice, the guilt starts to sort of, the volume on that turns down a little bit.
It does.
But with particular people and particular situations, I have particular people in my life where the guilt, it's just there, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing for me to set that boundary. But it's hard.
Oh, it is.
Because my people pleaser gets
yes.
triggered.
No, I totally understand that.
Yeah. And like one of the other thoughts that I had was just there are periods in your life that are intensely challenging. And it's that difference between the stress and the burnout, isn't it? But it's when you have those periods where you are being challenged and you're feeling like you're pushing, those are just part of life. It's like we're not sort of advocating that there's this work-life balance utopia that we're all striving that everything's just going to be in harmony the whole time. But it's like when challenge arises, acknowledge it, see it for what it is, and build in plans for rest and recovery on the other side of that, or in the midst of going through it. Like seeing that, because you can't run and live in a cave and not experience these things in your life. So what we're really,
and they make life rich and meaningful, and you, as cliched as it is, you do learn things from
brings the lessons.
Yes,
that's the only gift really that comes out of it.
Yeah. I think writing it down is really important as well for me anyway, because having the ideas in my mind, it's hard to connect to those when I'm in this sort of space. So I have clients who have flashcards in their wallets. I've got younger people that I work with who have like apps. I don't even know what the apps are. I should know. I just use my notes section in my phone. But having something it might even be a prompt on your fridge that has 5 keywords that remind you. It might be self-soothe, ground, breathe, step back.
Your login password that you type in something, that you have to type in 5 times a day is kind of, just a good touchstone to come back to something, so you could have, you use a nice phrase as your login password. I have like wallpaper on my phone that, that says choose courage. And it's just like a little touchstone thing for me to kind of ground me back into the things that are important. And to, And sometimes it's just those simple things that can trigger off a whole series of self-care then. So it's just that, something little that sparks that. So we could sit here and talk about this for hours. It's just a topic that we're so passionate about, because until you actually get this right, so much else in your life is compromised. And while they are gifts and they do, you do learn a lot out of it, you don't want to stay there for too long, and you want to come out the other side a better person rather than a bitter person. Or a damaged, sort of wounded person. I think a bit of wounding's pretty normal though after burnout. So that, that whole idea of kind of healing yourself, it's real. Like, these things it is part of being human, and helping yourself through it also helps other people through it. So, but one of the things that we did want to talk to you about, which having gone through all of this, the gift of it for us was making sure that we could share our learnings with everybody else, because in the work that we do, coaching and consulting, we come across people who are in their businesses, who are in roles, who are working for other companies, or just our friends even, who are going through the same thing. And so we created this course with all of the things that we had learned from our respective careers and subsequent study that we've also done as well.
And the tools that we turn to now to help us, as you said, that plan, to have that plan in place and have that plan before you get there so that you can put that into place. Well, this is, I guess, a combination of the plans and tools and techniques and the learnings that we have that we want to share with others.
Yeah. And for us, it is about holding space to work on the business and to allow yourself time to grow your self-awareness and to give yourself space to actually think. So, because when you're in burnout in particular, you are just reacting and you're responding and doing often, actually stopping and unhooking from all of that and giving yourself a chance to work through some of the stuff going on is so important. So for us, we know that we feel more in control of what's going on in our lives and our businesses when we've sat down and we've actually hashed through some stuff and talked about some stuff and planned it, and and actually go through that process of like, okay, well, what's everything that's going on for us in our business? What do we want to do? And we write it all down and we do this big download. And then we start building it back up out of that and say, well, what's actually realistic and what do we feel excited about, what has the most uplift for us in this.
And we're certain that, and the reason most of you are listening to this now is because you're either feeling like you're overworked, or that you just haven't got the time for the things that you want to do, or you've been pulled in a lot of different directions. And that's one of the things that our course addresses is those feelings, and how to get that clarity is probably one of the biggest words that is used for those that come and do the time and then finish it. Say, I came because I wanted clarity, and I now feel like I know where I'm going, and that I'm working on the things that are essential, and that now my months ahead will be focused on doing a lot less but doing that better, which is what we're aiming for. So in the course we cover 6 packets we refer to, which pretty much covers a lot of the things we've talked about today in a roundabout way. And a big section, the upload, is very much about prioritisation and planning. So it can keep you focused and on track, so that you know what you're doing, and you can say no to those things that you've deemed to not be your priorities or your focus for that time.
And Jack, some of your mindfulness resources that you have on your website, we've also got in the course as well. As a past student of the course as well, which was fantastic. But you have on your website as well, which is Inner Melbourne Psychology.
Inner Melb Psychology.
Yeah. Some resources, and so we've put them also in our course as part of this overall idea of, well, how, what are the tools that you need in order to be in this world and to do the things that your big, wild, ambitious heart has in it, in a way that actually expands your potential and your capacity rather than takes you down in the process of doing that.
And I think practicing those things, so say mindfulness or going to a regular yoga class, those sorts of strategies, it's really important to do those when you're feeling even keel. Because you can't expect them to help you when you're in that sort of meltdown zone. You've got to have those skills sort of built up before then. It's hard though, because it's not very motivating when you're feeling calm and peaceful.
Well, it kind of is if you sort of, I ended up doing yoga like before my burnout, and I stepped it up actually as I was going into it, but I've kept it as a practice. And now I know that, for me, it's an important thing to do. And even if I only go to 1 class a week, and now I have friends that I've made by going it. So I go as much to see them. And that's kind of my mechanism. It's like, because it's 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and sometimes I don't feel like going, and then I think, but such and such will be there and I want to have a coffee with them afterwards. Or, so it works on so many different levels. And then it's like, no, I know that this is important for me, because I could miss 1 week and I feel the difference. So in our course, we actually do have a habit map. We get you to work through a habit map, and what does a good week actually look like for you, and what are some of the things that you can put in there, so that you do as much as possible stay in the green zone of all of that. So
we've got a very special offer for everyone that is listening to this webinar,
stayed this far
and wants to stop the hustle. Then if you use that promo code, our course is open today. And you can receive $100 off doing that online course. So just visit our website, ovkin/courses/the-time, and come and join the Ovkin family. And it'll also involve 2 live webinars with us periodically throughout the course period, so that we can check in, answer questions, have these kind of chats, and support you along your stop the hustle journey on the time.
So we'd just like to really thank Jack for coming in today.
Yes,
and,
my pleasure. It's been awesome.
It's been fantastic. As I said, we could talk about this for hours.
And such a great reminder, I found it for me too, to kind of focus on this and talk about it and revisit things that I've got to, practice.
So if somebody was in burnout right now, what would be your kind of number 1 takeaway for them?
Oh, I can never summarize anything into 1 point. I think asking yourself what you need, and if you're really stuck, which, I think that could be a complicated question, ask yourself, what would you do for someone that you loved or cared about right now? What would you do for them? And it might be really simple. It might just be going home early today, or you know, having a sleep in tomorrow morning. It doesn't have to be big. But, yeah, I think asking yourself what you need.
When they're unexpected and you don't usually do it.
Yeah. Well, we seem to have rounded off all the questions today. So thanks, Jack. Well done. Very comprehensive. If you do feel like you need some more assistance, we have got just a few resources there. If you're really in struggle town, you really need to reach out to somebody sooner rather than later. And people like Jack, and who is professionally trained to kind of take on, you know, when things are really serious, well and truly reach out. We've all had times where we've reached out to professionals in this space. And there's absolutely no shame or stigma in it. I actually think that it's a sign of strength when you can put up the flag and just go, I need help.
And you don't have to wait until it feels really serious. No. I see a lot of people in my practice that come in, no, at all points, but coming in early is great too, because there's a lot of work that can be done then. And I think the note there about the mental health treatment plans is really, that's really useful to have there. So Medicare does cover sessions with a psychologist or a clinical psychologist up to a certain point, which is great.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you, guys. It's been lovely chatting.
And thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you around on our next webinar.
Yeah.
Take care. Oh, and our course. We'll see you in our course.
Yeah, hopefully.
Come and join us at the time. Bye.